I want you to imagine walking into a room where you think you're completely alone. No cameras, no witnesses, no one to judge or evaluate your every move. In that moment of perceived solitude, who are you? How do you stand? How do you breathe? What expression crosses your face when you believe no one is watching? That person, that unguarded version of yourself, is closer to your truth than any performance you've ever given for an audience. But here's what will disturb you about what I'm going to share tonight. Even in that empty room, you still have an audience. The most demanding, most critical, most unforgiving audience you'll ever face, and that audience is you. I discovered this truth not in front of cheering crowds or movie cameras, but in the silence of my own training room at 3 in the morning. I had been practicing for hours, perfecting techniques that would never be seen by another soul. No students to impress, no masters to satisfy, no cameras rolling, just me, the wooden dummy, and the echo of my own movements in the darkness. As I threw a punch into that silence, I realized something that stopped me cold. I was still performing, even alone, even in complete privacy. I was putting on a show for myself, playing the role of what I thought a martial artist should be. You do this too, don't you? Don't you? Even when you're completely alone, you catch yourself posing, adjusting your posture, rehearsing conversations, practicing expressions in the mirror. You've become so accustomed to having an audience that you've forgotten how to exist without one. But the most tragic part isn't that you perform for others. The most tragic part is that you've become a stranger to your own authentic self. You've been on stage so long that you've forgotten there was ever a time when you weren't acting. Let me take you back to a moment that changed everything for me. I was 7 years old, sitting alone in my father's study, while he was at the opera house. No one was home, no one was watching. And for the first time in my young life, I felt the strange freedom of complete solitude, In that moment, I began to move. Not the rigid forms I'd been taught, not the disciplined stances expected of me, but something else entirely. Something that came from deep within, something that felt like liquid fire flowing through my small frame. I moved like water finding its way through rocks, like wind bending grass, like something alive and wild and completely my own. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Instantly, I snapped back into the posture I'd been taught, the stance that was expected, the role of the good son, the disciplined student. My father entered the room, smiled approvingly at my proper form, and continued on his way. But in that transition from authentic movement to expected performance, I felt something die inside me. I felt the prison walls of other people's expectations closing around my spirit, and I realized, even at 7 years old, that I had just chosen safety over truth, approval over authenticity. How many times have you made that same choice? How many times have you felt that wild, authentic energy stirring within you, only to suppress it the moment you sensed someone might be watching? You've trained yourself so well to be what others expect so that you've lost touch with what you actually are beneath all those layers of performance. But here's what's even more disturbing. You've become so skilled at this performance that you fool even yourself. You've been wearing masks for so long that you've forgotten what your real face looks like. The truth is, most people live their entire lives as actors in a play they never auditioned for, speaking lines they never wrote, playing characters they never chose to be. They wake up each morning, check their reflection, and ask not, "Who am I today?" but "Who do I need to be today?" They dress not for themselves, but for their audience. They speak not their truth, but the words they think others want to hear. They move through their days like performers on a stage, constantly aware of the spotlight, constantly adjusting their performance based on who's watching. But the greatest tragedy isn't that you perform for others. The greatest tragedy is what happens when the curtain falls, when the audience goes home, when you're finally alone with yourself. In those moments of silence, you're confronted with a stranger. You sit in your empty house and realize you don't know who you are when no one is watching. You've become so skilled at being what others want that you've lost the ability to be what you are. I remember the night this reality hit me with devastating clarity. I was in my Hong Kong apartment, having just finished a film that would make me famous throughout Asia. The crew had gone home, the interviews were done, the cameras were off. I stood in my bathroom, looking at my reflection in the harsh fluorescent light, and I realized I didn't recognize the man staring back at me, not because fame had changed me, but because I had finally stopped performing long enough to see who I really was underneath all the roles I'd been playing. That man in the mirror was tired, not just physically exhausted from the demands of filmmaking, but spiritually drained from the constant performance. He had opinions that never made it past his lips because they might not be popular. So he had dreams that remained hidden because they might seem foolish. He had fears he never acknowledged because they might make him appear weak. He had a wildness, a creative fire, that he kept carefully contained because it might be too much for others to handle. In that moment of brutal honesty, I realized I had been living my life as an edited version of myself, constantly cutting out the parts that might not play well to an audience. The most dangerous thing about living for an audience is that it's addictive. The applause feels good. The applause feels good. The approval is intoxicating. The feeling that you're giving people what they want creates a false sense of purpose and connection. But like any addiction, it demands more and more of you while giving less and less. You find yourself constantly escalating your performance, becoming more and more extreme in your attempts to maintain the attention and approval of your audience. You lose yourself in the character you're playing, forgetting that the character was supposed to serve you, not the other way around. I see this everywhere I look. In the martial arts world, I watch students who move beautifully when they're being observed, but lose all flow and power when they think they're alone. In Hollywood, I work with actors who are brilliant on camera, but seem to disappear entirely when the cameras stop rolling. In everyday life, I meet people who are charming and confident in social situations, but become anxious and uncertain the moment they're by themselves. They've become so dependent on external validation that they've lost the ability to validate themselves. But here's what I discovered in my years of training, both in martial arts and in life. Your most powerful moments, your most creative breakthroughs, your most authentic expressions, they don't happen when you're performing for an audience. They happen in the spaces between performances. They happen in the early morning hours when you're alone with your thoughts. They happen in the quiet moments when you stop trying to be impressive and start being honest. They happen when you finally have the courage to exist without an audience. Think about the last time you were truly alone. Not just physically alone, but mentally and emotionally alone. When was the last time you weren't performing for someone, even if that someone was just the imaginary audience in your head? When was the last time you moved your body without thinking about how it looked? I feel my emotions without trying to fix them. I acknowledge my energy level without trying to modify it. I simply exist without agenda, without performance, without audience. In those 30 minutes, I often discover things about myself that surprise me. Emotions I didn't know I was carrying. Thoughts I didn't realize I was thinking. Desires I had been suppressing. Fears I had been avoiding. Creativity that had been waiting for space to emerge. It's like having a daily meeting with my authentic self, checking in with who I really am beneath all the roles I play throughout the day. You would be amazed at how different you feel when you start your day from a place of authentic self-awareness, rather than from a place of anticipated performance. When you know who you are before you step onto the stage of your life, you can choose your performances consciously, rather than being controlled by them. You can play your roles without losing yourself in them. You can interact with your audience without becoming dependent on their approval. But I must warn you, this practice of authentic solitude will change you. It will make you less willing to betray yourself for the comfort of others. It will make you less interested in playing roles that don't serve your truth. It will make you more selective about the audiences you choose to perform for. It will make you more conscious of when you're being real and when you're being fake. And it will make it increasingly difficult for you to live a life that doesn't honor who you really are. Many people avoid this kind of authentic solitude because they're afraid of what they might discover about themselves. They're afraid they might not like who they are when no one is watching. They're afraid they might be boring or ordinary or flawed. But here's what I've discovered through years of this practice. Your authentic self isn't boring. It's the most interesting thing about you. Your authentic self isn't ordinary. It's completely unique. Your authentic self isn't flawed. It's perfectly imperfect in exactly the way it needs to be. The person you are when no one is watching isn't a lesser version of your performed self. It's a more complete version. It includes all the parts you usually edit out, the uncertainty that makes you human, the vulnerability that makes you relatable, the wildness that makes you creative, the softness that makes you loving, the darkness that makes you complex, the light that makes you powerful. When you stop performing and start being, you don't become less. You become more. You become whole. This is why authentic solitude is so transformative. It's not about isolation or withdrawal from the world. It's about developing a strong enough relationship with yourself that you can engage with the world from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, from authenticity rather than performance, from choice rather than compulsion. When you know who you are, when no one is watching, you can choose who to be when everyone is watching. I remember filming a scene for Enter the Dragon where I had to deliver a philosophical dialogue about the nature of fighting. Take after take, I delivered the lines as written, hitting all the right emotional notes, giving the director what he wanted. But something felt off. During a break, I stepped away from the cameras, away from the crew, and found a quiet corner where I could be alone with the material. In that solitude, I connected with the truth of what I was trying to express. I felt the philosophy in my body, not just my mind. I experienced the emotion behind the words, not just the performance of them. It was still the same dialogue, but it was coming from a real place rather than a performed place. And you can see the difference in the final film. This is the power of authentic solitude. It's not about becoming a hermit or avoiding human connection. It's about developing such a strong relationship with your own truth that everything you do in the world becomes an expression of that truth, rather than a performance designed to get something from others. When you know who you are, when no one is watching, every interaction becomes an opportunity for authentic expression rather than manipulative performance. But developing this relationship with your authentic self requires courage. It requires the willingness to face parts of yourself you might not like. It requires the strength to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix or change it. It requires the patience to get to know yourself as you actually are, rather than as you think you should be. And it requires the commitment to honor what you discover, even when it conflicts with what others expect from you. The most profound realization I've had through this practice is that the person I am when no one is watching is not separate from the person I am when everyone is watching. They're the same person, just expressed differently depending on the context. The goal isn't to eliminate all performance from your life. The goal is to make sure that all your performances are expressions of your authentic self rather than betrayals of it. To choose your roles consciously rather than being unconsciously controlled by them. When you achieve this integration, something magical happens. You stop feeling exhausted by social interaction because you're no longer maintaining a false persona. You stop feeling anxious about being discovered because there's nothing fake to hide. You stop feeling empty when you're alone because you actually enjoy your own company. You stop feeling dependent on others' approval because you've learned to approve of yourself. You become like water, able to take any shape while never losing your essential nature. This is what I mean when I say that a man is truly himself when he has no audience. It's not about avoiding audiences or living in isolation. It's about developing such a strong sense of self that your audience becomes irrelevant to your essential being. You can perform for others without losing yourself in the performance. You can give people what they want without betraying what you are. You can be generous with your energy without depleting your essence. But this level of authentic self-awareness requires practice. It requires daily time alone with yourself without agenda or distraction. It requires honest self-observation without judgment or criticism. It requires the courage to feel whatever you're feeling without immediately trying to change it. It requires the wisdom to distinguish between who you are and who you think you should be. And it requires the strength to choose authenticity even when performance would be easier or more profitable. It would be easier or more profitable. I challenge you to begin this practice tonight. After everyone else in your house has gone to sleep, after you've turned off all your devices, after you've stepped away from all external input and stimulation, sit alone with yourself for just 10 minutes. Your humanity isn't something to transcend. It's something to embrace and express. The world doesn't need another perfect performance. It needs your authentic expression. It needs the unique way you see reality when you're not trying to see it the right way. It needs the particular way you feel things when you're not trying to feel them appropriately. It needs the specific way you create when you're not trying to create something impressive. It needs the distinctive way you love when you're not trying to love correctly. So I leave you with this challenge. Tonight, when you're completely alone, ask yourself this question: who am I when no one is watching? And then have the courage to sit with whatever answer emerges. Don't judge it. Don't try to improve it. Don't attempt to make it more interesting or more appropriate. Just acknowledge it, honor it, and begin the lifelong practice of bringing that authentic self into the world, not as a performance, but as an expression. Because that person, that real, unedited, authentic you, is exactly who the world needs you to be. The audience will always be there in one form or another. But your relationship with yourself must be stronger than your relationship with any audience.